Okay, let's think about this. What if the way you see yourself, what it means to be human, is maybe incomplete?
That's a big question.
It is. For ages, right? We've gone back and forth. Are we just, complex biological machines, pure physics and chemistry in the brain?
The standard debate, yeah.
But still, there's that feeling, isn't it? That sense of choice, of having dignity, that you're more than just like electrical signals firing.
That persistent intuition. It's hard to shake.
Exactly. So today, we're going to really dig into that question. We've got some fascinating analyses that might just shift how you think about it all.
Sounds good.
And this whole exploration, it really connects with the spirit of mindful moments. That YouTube channel, they use AI book analysis to get people reflecting, thinking critically.
Right. A similar goal.
Precisely what we're aiming for here.
Yeah.
So that feeling, that something more, where does that intuition really come from historically?
That goes way back. Think about someone like Descartes, a giant of the scientific revolution, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But even he grappled with a purely mechanistic view, especially for humans. It didn't quite sit right with his moral beliefs. He needed something else.
So that's where the ghost of the machine comes in.
That's the famous phrase, yeah. He proposed this idea of a non-physical soul, distinct from the body, the machine. It was his way of reconciling the science of, say, clockwork mechanisms with the uniqueness he saw in human consciousness and free will.
It's such a sticky image. Ghost in the machine. And it's wild how that basic idea, mind separate from body, still sneaks in to how we talk every day.
Oh, definitely.
Like use your head, as if you're telling your head what to do, like it's a tool.
Or out-of-body experiences. The very phrase implies a you that can leave the body behind.
Right. Even just saying my body or my brain, it sounds like ownership, like there's a me that possesses this physical stuff.
It's deeply embedded in our language and arguably our intuitive psychology. There's a great thought experiment from Dan Dennett on this.
Oh, yeah.
He asks, imagine you could have a brain transplant into a new body, or your current body could get a new brain. Where do you go?
Instinctively, I'd say I go with the brain.
Most people do. It really highlights that gut feeling that our self, our essence, is somehow located in the mind or the brain, and it's separate from, or at least primary to, the physical container.
Okay, so that's one major strand of thought.
Yeah.
But then there's this other huge idea, the blank slate. What's the core thinking there?
Right, the tabula rasa, or blank slate. Basically, it's the idea that the mind starts out empty. No innate ideas, no pre-existing content. Everything we are, mentally speaking, comes from experience, from the environment.
Like a blank sheet of paper just waiting for life to write on it.
Exactly. And this idea has had a massive impact, shaping everything from education philosophies to political ideologies for centuries.
Really? Who were some key figures pushing this?
Well, you had thinkers like William Godwin back in the day, an early liberal philosopher. He literally described children as raw material and minds as a sheet of white paper.
Wow, raw material.
Yeah. And then maybe more chillingly, you see someone like Mao Zedong using the blank slate metaphor. He argued that because people were poor and blank, you could write the newest and most beautiful words on them. It justified radical social reshaping.
That takes it to a whole different level, sobering, like you said. But it wasn't just political figures, right? This blank slate idea got traction in the social sciences, too.
Oh, hugely. Emile Durkheim, one of the founders of sociology, he was a major proponent.
Oh.
His view was that you explain social things with other social things, social facts, not by digging into individual psychology. He saw individual natures as just indeterminate material that society molds. The cause of social life, he argued, is in the social environment, not the person's innate makeup.
So the individual's inherent qualities were almost irrelevant compared to the power of society.
Pretty much, yeah. That was the dominant view. Leslie White, an anthropologist, put it bluntly, mind is merely the behavior of nerves, glands, sense organs, muscles, etc., all shaped from outside.
And Margaret Mead.
She described human nature as the rawest, most undifferentiated of raw material. The strong belief was that culture was everything. The mind was just passive clay.
But then, science starts to push back. Cognitive science, neuroscience, they begin to challenge both the ghost and the blank slate, right? How?
Exactly. Cognitive science started thinking about the mind in terms of computation, information processing. It showed that, yeah, human behavior is incredibly varied, but it's not just random. It seems to follow complex rules, like internal programs. It's flexible, but not infinitely so.
So there's an underlying structure.
Right. And neuroscience brought the physical evidence. Suddenly, we could see things. We learned how specific chemicals change thoughts and feelings. We saw how damage to particular brain areas knocks out specific mental functions, language, face recognition, whatever.
That makes the mind-body connection very real, very tangible.
Absolutely. And now neurotechnologies are even starting to, crudely read thoughts by looking at brain activity. Plus, you look at animal studies finding genes in mice that affect how well they learn, for example. And just the sheer complexity of the brain itself. Billions of neurons, trillions of connections. That suggests a biological machine easily powerful enough to generate the richness of human thought and feeling. It doesn't require a separate ghost.
And what about consciousness after death?
Well, the scientific consensus is pretty clear. When the brain dies, consciousness, as we understand it, ceases. There's no reliable evidence for communicating with the dead or consciousness persisting without brain activity. That poses a real problem for the purely non-physical soul idea.
Okay, so the evidence points towards a biological basis for the mind. But that doesn't mean we're just robots controlled by our genes, does it? That sounds too simple, too.
No, absolutely not. That's a crucial clarification. Genes play a role, a significant one, but they aren't destiny. It's not like gene A automatically makes you do behavior B.
It's more subtle than that.
Much more. Most genetic effects on behavior are probabilistic. They might give you a nudge, a predisposition, increase the likelihood of certain traits developing within a certain environment.
Right, the environment matters.
Hugely. Behavioral genetics often estimates that maybe around half, and this is a rough average across traits, about half the variation we see in psychological traits between people in a given group might be linked to genetic variation within that group. The other half, environment, chance, unique experiences.
And genes can express differently depending on the environment too, right?
Exactly. Gene expression isn't fixed. Experiences can literally change how your genes function, so it's a constant interplay.
And how does evolution fit into this more nuanced picture?
Well, evolutionary psychology looks at why we might have these innate tendencies in the first place. The idea is that our minds contain systems for perception, emotion, learning, social interaction that evolved because they helped our ancestors survive and reproduce.
Like enjoying certain foods or finding certain things attractive.
Precisely. We don't consciously think, I must pass on my genes, therefore I will eat this sugary fruit. We just enjoy the fruit. That enjoyment is the evolved mechanism that historically promoted survival and reproduction.
But it's not all just selfish competition, is it? Evolution also explains cooperation.
Absolutely essential point. Cooperation, empathy, fairness, forming groups, developing social rules. These are also deeply evolved human traits. Group living was key to our survival, so traits that facilitated, that were strongly selected for. It's not just a naturette and tooth and claw situation. Conflict exists, sure, but so do mechanisms for resolving it. Understanding this whole complex dance between our biology, our psychology, and our environment, that's exactly the kind of stuff we try to unpack on Mindful Moments in our podcasts. It's about appreciating the full picture of being human.
So if it's not pure blank slate and culture isn't just writing on that slate, how does culture fit in? Is it separate from our biology?
A better way to think about it might be that culture is actually part of our evolved human nature, an extension of it, you could say, our phenotype.
How so?
Because we evolved to be knowledge-using, cooperative creatures. Culture emerges from that. It's the pool of shared knowledge, skills, technologies, beliefs, and social conventions that gets passed down and built upon generation after generation.
So discoveries accumulate, ways of coordinating get established.
Exactly. Different cultures arise not because groups have fundamentally different genes for culture, but because they've accumulated different sets of information and solutions over time. But importantly, culture doesn't just pour itself into formless minds. It interacts with our existing cognitive architecture, our innate ways of learning, categorizing, reasoning about the social world.
Okay, that makes sense. It's an interaction, not just one thing determining the other, which seems to bring us to the danger of explaining everything just by looking at the smallest parts. Reductionism.
Yes, what philosopher Hilary Putnam called greedy reductionism. The trap of thinking you can explain, say, why World War I happened just by talking about the physics of atoms and molecules.
Right, you lose something essential.
You lose the relevant level of explanation. Putnam used the analogy of a square peg and a round hole. Why won't the square peg fit in the round hole, which is slightly smaller?
Because
Well,
it's square and the hole is round.
Yeah.
The shapes don't match.
exactly. You don't need to analyze the quantum state of every atom in the peg and the board. The explanation lies at the level of geometry, of macroscopic shapes.
Okay, got it.
And it's similar for the mind. To really understand it, you need multiple levels of analysis. People like Chomsky, David Marr, Nico Tinbergen propose different frameworks, but the core idea is similar. You need to understand the function. What problem is the system solving? The algorithm, what steps does it follow in real time? The neural implementation, how is it physically built in the brain? Its development, how does it arise in the individual? And its evolution, why did it arise in the species?
And you can't just collapse one level onto another. Explaining the biophysics of a neuron membrane doesn't automatically explain, say, how we learn grammar or resolve conflicts.
Precisely. Each level offers crucial insights, and none can fully replace the others.
And this ties back to the idea that the mind isn't just a homogeneous soup of neurons, right? It needs structure, computation.
Yes. Just having billions of interconnected neurons isn't enough on its own to explain complex thought. You likely need something more like a computational architecture. Systems that can handle things like rules, variables, propositions, goal states.
Can you give an example?
Think about language again. How do you form the past tense of a new verb you've never heard before, like to plick? Most English speakers would say plicked.
Right. Add, ed.
You apply a rule. That suggests a system that can manipulate symbols according to rules, not just make associations based on past inputs. While purely associative neural networks are powerful and can learn amazing things, explaining all of cognition, especially things like systematic reasoning and language, likely requires models that incorporate more structured, rule-based components alongside associative learning. It's probably a mix.
So it's not just stimulus response. There's internal processing with rules.
Seems very likely, yes. A purely generic learning machine probably isn't sufficient without some built-in ways of organizing information.
Which leads us back to that interplay between nature and nurture, even from the very start.
Absolutely. It's not like genes build the brain entirely and then the environment starts shaping it. The process is interactive from conception onwards. Genes guide the basic wiring plan, but experience constantly refines it, even in the womb.
You mean experience before birth matters?
Definitely. Think about experiments where, say, auditory input in the womb influences later preferences in animals, or the remarkable experiments by Regan-Casseur, where they rewired the brains of developing ferrets.
What did they do?
They basically redirected the input from the eyes, which normally goes to the visual cortex, to the auditory cortex instead. And amazingly, the auditory cortex started to develop some of the structures and response properties usually found in the visual cortex.
Wow, so the input itself helps shape the brain region's function.
It strongly suggests that, yes, the brain isn't a blank slate. It has an inherent genetically guided organization. But that organization is flexible and critically depends on input and experience to develop properly and become specialized. It's truly nature via nurture.
So stepping back, it feels like we've moved quite a distance from those older, simpler ideas, the ghost separate from the machine, or the totally blank slate written on by experience.
I think that's a fair summary, yeah. We've explored why that intuitive mind-body split feels so real, looked at the history and the limitations of the blank slate view, and then seen how cognitive science, neuroscience, genetics, and evolutionary thinking all point towards a much more integrated picture.
A picture where our biology provides the foundation, the potentials, the constraints.
Right, our inherited predispositions.
But our experiences, our environment, and crucially our culture all interact with that foundation to shape who we become.
Exactly. Culture itself isn't some mystical force acting on biology, but emerges from our biological nature, particularly our ability to learn, share, and cooperate. It's all deeply interwoven.
It really underscores how complex and, honestly, how fascinating understanding ourselves actually is. It's not a simple answer.
Not at all. And thinking about these different layers, these interactions, it inevitably shapes how you view not just yourself, but society, education, politics, all of it. It's an ongoing process, this quest to understand human nature.
Definitely food for thought.
Always.
Well, if this discussion got you thinking, we really hope you'll subscribe for more explorations like this one.
Yeah, please do.
And if you know someone who'd find this interesting, please share it with them. We've also put a link in the show notes if you want to dig deeper into some of the source materials or related work.
There's always more to learn.
Absolutely. But most importantly, we hope this encourages you to keep asking questions, to think critically about these really fundamental ideas about who we are.